with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, the Environmental Protection Agency is being accused of trying to silence two longtime EPA enforcement attorneys who have publicly criticized a key component of the climate change legislation being considered by Congress. Last week, the EPA directed Laurie Williams and Allan Zabel to remove or edit a video they posted to YouTube that warns a cap-and-trade plan will not effectively combat global warming and is, quote, fatally flawed. The couple instead advocate for a solution involving carbon fees with rebates. The video is titled "The Huge Mistake" and was posted to the web in September. The agency issued its warning only after the couple published an opinion article in the Washington Post in late October, which echoed concerns raised in the video. The EPA also said they would have to get approval for any future outside writing projects. The video is no longer on the couple's website, but it is available in full through a link posted on the website of Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility.
Well, these are the two sentences the EPA ordered Laurie Williams and Allan Zabel to remove from the video or face disciplinary action.
Our opinions are based on more than 20 years each working as attorneys at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in the San Francisco Regional Office. In my work at EPA, I have been overseeing California's cap-and-trade and offset programs for more than 20 years.
EPA says it's simply asking the couple to follow government ethics rules that require them to state that their views are their own and not those of the agency. But the couple do state in the video that they were speaking in their capacity as private citizens, parents, and a married couple, and not on behalf of the EPA.
However, nothing in this video is intended to represent the views of EPA or the Obama administration.
Well, Laurie Williams and Allan Zabel join us now from Berkeley, California. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Is this appearance approved by the EPA?
Yes, we do have ethical clearance to continue speaking out on climate change issues. We just had not understood that the restrictions on that clearance prohibited us from describing in detail our government experience, the nature or length of our government experience.
Well, could you talk some about your objections to the cap-and-trade approach to handling climate change?
Yes. Basically, as stated in the video, we think that cap-and-trade is, with offsets especially, is fundamentally flawed. And the reason for that is that we think offsets are reductions in greenhouse gases which happen outside the capped sources. And offsets, especially in a world market, cannot be adequately enforced or policed, and you're not sure whether the reductions are real, whether they go beyond what would have happened anyway. And since the cap-and-trade bills before Congress include so many offsets, these programs could be run for approximately 20 years while relying on reductions only from these offsets. And so we think that this fatal flaw locks in climate degradation for approximately 20 years.
You know, I think one of the big problems is that people don't even understand what's being talked about. Like when you talk about cap and trade, when you talk about offsets. Laurie Williams, give us a basic lesson, just a thumbnail kind of primer. What are offsets? What's cap and trade?
Okay. Cap and trade means that facilities need to, year by year, reduce their emissions until a certain level is met. That's supposed to be a declining cap. Trading means that if some facilities have more trouble than others reducing their emissions, they can buy pollution permits from other facilities that are having an easier time reducing. However, in this climate bill, facilities can meet their obligation to reduce not only by buying permits from other facilities, but by buying carbon offsets. And the bill specifically authorizes more than 2 billion tons a year of offsets, which would be enough to cover all required reductions for almost 20 years. In addition, there are other problems.
Could you explain what an offset is?
Right. So a carbon offset means some reduction that happens outside the capped sources. And specifically, we give a couple of examples in our video. Sorry, I need a little water. But one good example that a lot of people are able to understand is forestry. So let's say you have a forest and I pay you to reduce or stop logging in your forest. That allows me to burn coal above the cap at my coal-fired power plant. But the question is, perhaps you were never planning to cut your forest and now you've just received a bonus for what you're going to do anyway. Or maybe you were planning to cut your forest and now you don't, but demand for wood doesn't go away. So what happens is that economic activity merely shifts to somewhere else. So there's not truly an additional reduction. All you have is extra coal burned above the cap. That's a simple example of a carbon offset.
Or, for example, if you're an international or multinational corporation and you have a forest in Brazil and a forest in the United States, you could reduce your use of the forest in the United States but increase it in Brazil, and that would not be effective?
Right. That's the kind of what's called leakage that results in the carbon offsets not being an additional reduction.
Now, you also mentioned that your experience in California shows you that even the cap part of cap and trade has been used wrongly because the limits on the caps are sometimes artificially high. Could you explain that?
Allan may be better able to explain that.
In the Los Angeles area, there is a program called Reclaim that deals with ground level smog. And when the program was initially started, it was approximately 70% overinflated, such that it took about 7 years for the reductions in the cap to reach what were the actual emissions. So that was 7 lost years.
Can you explain your objection to the Waxman bill, Markey Waxman?
Well, fundamentally, it's twofold. One is the inclusion of the offsets. I mean, we think that really locks in climate degradation. But the second is that we don't think that cap and trade really is ultimately a good or effective mechanism because, as was experienced in Europe, where cap and trade did fail for climate change, it produces price volatility and all sorts of gaming potentials, which are not good for economic activity. If you're going to get people to invest in clean energy, business people need certainty. They need to know that their investments in clean energy are going to be profitable. And cap and trade doesn't provide that certainty.
What we would say is that the major obstacle to a clean energy revolution is the fact that uncontrolled fossil fuels remain a lot cheaper than the clean energy alternatives we have today. That's why a major transition is not yet happening. And a real solution would be fixing that. We don't think that cap and trade with offsets has a near-term chance to fix that. In addition, in Waxman-Markey and in the Kerry-Boxer bill that's been introduced in the Senate, the goals for reductions are extremely weak. So they do not meet what most scientists are saying are necessary to be effective in addressing climate change.
A couple weeks ago, we spoke with the Australian scientist Tim Flannery, who'd come to this country. He was voted Australian of the Year in 2007. We asked him to talk a little bit about cap and trade.
Well, look, cap and trade by itself is not enough. But it is essential in terms of these international negotiations. And one way of showing that is to look at the alternatives. Just say the US went with a carbon tax. That would leave the president in a position where he'd be going to Copenhagen and saying, look, we've got a carbon tax, but we've got no idea really what it's going to do in terms of our emissions profile. So countries would just say, well, what are you actually pledging to? How are you going to deal with your emissions? You know, the only method really to allow countries to see transparently what other countries intend to do and then share the burden equally is through a cap and trade system. So it's not enough to deal with emissions overall, but it is an essential prerequisite for any global deal on climate change.
Tim Flannery is also the chair of the Copenhagen Climate Council. By the way, Democracy Now! Will be there broadcasting for 2 weeks from the big summit in December. But Allan Zabel, your response, he's a big proponent of cap and trade.
Well, that assumes that the cap in cap and trade actually works, which we're saying that it doesn't, especially because of these outside offsets. And the experience in Europe really bore that out when they tried to do the Kyoto Protocol 1, and it was pretty much of a dismal failure. It produced lots of price volatility. There were huge windfall profits for utilities, and it produced very little in the way of greenhouse gas reductions.
I think the other thing that happens is the offsets make it look on an account